You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Welcome to the Christ and Classics podcast, where we discuss and consider the classics in light of the Christ. My name's Colton Moore, and in this episode, you're going to hear Devin and I sit down with Andrew Kern from the Circe Institute. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about Homer, why he is crucial for education in general, how his stories relate to the Holy Scriptures, even finding their deepest intuitions, really, in the Holy Scriptures, because Homer was a man created in the image of God, and how they should affect the way we teach. Mr. Kern gives us some helpful tips for philosophy and rhetoric, going back to the source of various authors, such as Aristotle and Plato, the source being Homer himself. And so you've got a treat ahead of you. We had a delightful time with Andrew, and we're very thankful to have had him on. So without further ado, here we go.
Well, thanks for joining us. You told us to call you Andrew in the email, so I'll just call you by Andrew. I guess for our listeners, many are already familiar with the Circe Institute and with you. So why don't you just give us just a brief synopsis of who you are, what you do, and I guess just one, an icebreaker, if you will. Since we're going to talk about Homer, tell us about your introduction to Homer. Where did you first meet this ancient Greek?
Oh, where did I meet him? Okay. All right. Well, I'm Andrew Kern, like you said. I'm with the Circe Institute, and what that stands for is Center for Independent Research on Classical Education. And then when we started doing research, people started wanting the fruit of it, and we wanted to give people the fruit of it. So we turned it into consulting and integrated resources for classical educators. So we provide resources and training and a teacher training apprenticeship and classes online. And it's a kind of a smorgasbord of different activities that we're gradually putting into something more and more coherent. So that's Circe. As far as my introduction to Homer, so when I was a kid in middle school, we read a book in English class, of all places. We read a book called Classical Myths That Live Today. I don't know. It's some kind of textbook, obviously. Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. Loved it. But I remember being bothered by it because it kept talking about this guy called Achilles. And the fascinating thing to me about that is that it bothered me that it kept talking about this guy named Achilles, which means that somewhere before that, I had encountered Greek mythology and Roman mythology. Otherwise, why would it bother me that they kept talking about this guy named Achilles? They made a big deal out of him. And I had never heard of him before. So how could he possibly be important? But that was my introduction to the Iliadic story, at least to the Homeric stories. And then I'm going to say when I was in probably 11th grade, I got a copy of the Odyssey from the Book of the Month Club. I got a copy of the Iliad and the Odyssey from the Book of the Month Club. And I remember reading it at a Greyhound bus. So I think that was it. I think that was the first time I actually read the Odyssey or Homer himself, if we will, in English. I think that was first time was when I was a junior in high school, maybe, just kind of for the fun of it. Yeah.
You broke up a little bit there, but so you're saying your junior year in high school and you got the Book of the Month, and it was the Iliad or the Odyssey or both?
I think I got both. So let me say again, since it broke up, I wondered about that. So when I was a junior in high school, I joined the Book of the Month Club, and I got Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, among other classics. Like Steinbeck and Hemingway, I think, were the other ones I got. And I remember reading the Odyssey on a Greyhound bus to visit my friend Eric. somewhere across the state of Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the first time it was the first time I read beginning to end anything by Homer.
Wow.
And I got to tell you, honestly, I thought the Odyssey was pretty good, but I didn't, like, nothing in me was going, this is the greatest thing ever written. And then when I read the Iliad the first time, I thought it was terrible. I was so bored. So,
Oh, man.
so that's my background.
Well, Devin, tell us, where did you first meet Homer?
Gee, I don't know. No, I mean, I think it would have been probably also my junior year in high school. I started going to a classical Christian school here in Oklahoma, and
Lucky.
I had no exposure before that to, well, I mean, I went to school before that, but I don't think I had read a book in full before that. I hated reading.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, I think my exposures were there, and it wasn't much in terms of the impression. I was more just kind of like, oh, okay, there's an old book that people like, and
yeah,
all right, there's a lot of repetition. Shakespeare seems to like them.
yeah.
But what about you, Colton?
Well, yeah, I'm the newbie. I wasn't classically trained. Devin and I met in seminary about we graduated 4 years ago, so we met in 2016 in seminary, and that's really where I learned about classical education, because we taught in the college, Devin and I, and it was a classical school while we were attending seminary, or getting educated in seminary. And it was there that I got to hear about Homer and other authors, and I had never read him before. I didn't read Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, in fact, until about 2 years ago when I started teaching it. And in the last 2 years, I've read them 4 times or so.
Oh, wow.
In the last 2 years. And I taught through it in 2 classes where we read through them all twice, and more or less, and I read them again and one more time. And I love the Iliad in particular. I think the Odyssey is great, but I'm partial toward the Iliad. And I guess there's a few questions that we could ask, but let's just start off with this: assuming that Homer is foundational for education, full stop. Why is he so crucial for education? I'm assuming we can all agree with that premise, maybe that Homer is crucial for education, period. And if that's true,
I would say so.
then what makes him crucial for education?
Yeah. So, wow, there's so many answers. One of them is that he was the teacher of the Greeks, and they acknowledge that, all of them. No Greek would have said anybody other than Homer is our teacher. Plato said it repeatedly. Socrates said it. I'm pretty sure Aristotle said it. And so they recognized him as their teacher. A second reason I would say is that he teaches how to teach. And so you have, for example, oh gosh, my head just exploded. Can I go clean it up?
Yeah, of course.
Take this, for example. Okay. The Odyssey is a book about weaving.
Mm-hmm.
Penelope weaves and unweaves this tapestry while Odysseus is trying to get back to her. Athena is the goddess of weaving. Okay. Odysseus is always weaving tales. When you get to the Iliad, what's Helen doing? She's weaving these tapestries of the people fighting in battle. Mm-hmm. And so Homer is as a weaver. Homer himself is weaving. Right. But also, what the Iliad is about is the will of Zeus moving toward its end. And what's Zeus doing? Well, Zeus is weaving his tapestry. So in the end, the Iliad is a book of Homer weaving, Zeus weaving through Athena, who's weaving. That's the Iliad. Okay. So both of them are weaving books. Okay. But the Odyssey is Homer weaving through Zeus, who's weaving through Athena, who's weaving through Odysseus, who's getting home to Penelope, who weaves and unweaves. Oh, and just for a bonus, I'll point out that the English word wife means weaver, and a single person can't weave. She can only spin. So she's a spinster. So that the image of weaving is the fabric of civilization. Okay. Civilization, I would say, occurs at a table when it's probably made of wood, because somebody made a table out of wood, and then somebody else made and laid on that table a tablecloth. And around that table, the farmer and the merchant gather. Okay. And they talk with each other, they learn each other's virtues, and they become civilized people. The farmer wants stability, the merchant wants change. The merchant travels the world like Odysseus, the farmer stays at home like Achilles wants to.
So Zeus as a weaver and Homer as a weaver, is that they're male? So that's kind of odd.
Weaving in the hands of Zeus and Odysseus is metaphorical.
Yeah.
It's analogical, right? So the women are literally weaving.
Right.
Although Athena is kind of mediating between the two because she's a goddess.
Right.
And Homer, well, I said that, Homer, Zeus, and Odysseus, they're weaving tales. They're weaving their will, and so on and so forth. But weaving is the archetypal art for wisdom. That's what wisdom is physically, is weaving. So what you do when you try to figure the world out is you take the threads that you're given and you weave a fabric out of it, a tapestry. And that's the Greek image, at least, of wisdom. And I think that's why in Proverbs 31, the Proverbs 31 lady, the Proverbs 31 woman, she weaves, right? She does a lot of other things too, but she weaves. And weaving is it's a mediating activity, right? So you have the merchant and you have the farmer. But the farmer can't weave unless he's got, the farmer's wife can't weave unless the merchant goes out and gets stuff to weave with, like a loom, right? And so that's why I say the table and the tablecloth are let's just, practically speaking, that's where civilization comes into existence. And it's where the one and the many and change and stability are interacting all the time. One of the breakdowns in society is when the dialogue between those who want stability and those who want change breaks down. Well, therefore it's breakdown. When the one and the many can't talk to each other, when the capacity for deliberation is lost. So deliberation itself is a weaving activity. Okay. Now, so what I started saying this for is to illustrate a point, which is that Homer talks about weaving at these multiple levels. Okay. He also talks, most of which you don't see. He does the same thing with education. He actually has Achilles being taught by the centaur. And he actually has Achilles being mentored by, what's the guy's name? Is it Mentor? Well, he has Thrasymachus being mentored by Mentor, right? That's why when people say, don't ever use the word mentee, that implies that mentor is an action, like you're a mentor. Mentor is just a person's name, okay? You're a mentor because you're like mentor. The person who a mentor ments, he doesn't ment. The person that a mentor teaches is his prodigy, his disciple, right? There's no mentor-mentee relationship, but who cares? It's English. We can do what we want with the language. But education happens in the Iliad and the Odyssey literally in a few places, but it happens metaphorically at level upon level upon level, and it happens in a way that most of the time your soul feels and delights in, but your mind isn't even necessarily aware it's happening. And that's what art does, right? It teaches us in a pre-conscious way. And wicked art, evil art, if I can put it this way, distorts us. Right? It distorts our perceptions of reality. But good art brings us into harmony with our nature, with the community we're a part of, and with the world that we live in. And that's what Homer's doing. And I've even come to the conclusion that he does it on purpose. I think he's very aware of the fact that he's at what we would now call the beginning of Greek civilization. I don't mean that he knows what's coming, but he knows that a civilized society is coming into being. And why the reason I argue that is because he's been holding on to, he has received since he was a little child, he or they, whatever, have received into their experience and their mind a long, long tradition of oral poetry. And he is a master of oral poetry. But also at the time when he's living, the city-states are now forming. And we're coming to the end of an era of 300, 400, 500 years of chaos. And he's intuiting, if he's not consciously aware, that something new is coming into being. And so what he's doing is capturing all the wisdom that he can possibly find in that tradition and expressing it as perfectly as he possibly can. It's not the work of one man, by which I don't mean there's not a Homer. I think there probably was a Homer. But even so, it's not the work of one man any more than, forgive me, but even any more than a sitcom is today. It's you got a whole bunch of people making these sitcoms. But the difference with Homer is you've got hundreds of years of refined tradition, right? Being told by moms to their children and fixed in cult. And so by the time you get to Homer, he is intending to teach the Hellenic people. He's intending to teach them.
Could this intuition be seen within the shield of Achilles?
Yeah, earlier than the end, but I would say so. Yeah, because again, when I read the Shield of Achilles the first time, I thought, big deal. You know what? So what? He's making a shield. But over the years, I've come to understand that the very direct simplicity of that shield. You compare it with Virgil's Shield of Aeneid, right?
Yeah.
Of Aeneas. It's a completely different thing. And the Shield of Aeneas in the Aeneid is this big romantic thing where the whole cosmos is included, and the underworld and the upper world and everything, as far as the imagination can reach. Virgil puts it all on that shield and then has Aeneas carry it, right? But it's not like that for Achilles. He's carrying the actual world that you live in. And my first read of that, I thought, and I'll be honest, probably for 5 or 10 years, I thought, okay, I'll teach this because it's in the book, but it's nothing particularly impressive about this.
Yeah.
And now I look at it and I'm in awe. First of all, a kind of a turning point was when it dawned on me finally that Achilles is literally taking the world on his shoulders in that shield. And he's protecting it and carrying it. He's representing it. And Hephaestus makes this, which is so interesting, right? And so yes, the Shield of Achilles is, we would say, a Weltanschauung, or we would say a worldview. It's a direct, vivid, simple description of what life was like, and it's what Achilles is trying to protect and what Achilles is representing and what he's learning about by being in it. And it's very direct, by the way. It's very honest. He doesn't create a fantasy. There's battles and there's stupid fights going on, and it's just normal human society being represented. And I think what Homer is saying is, in part, is, look, this is what life is like. You can't change this. Don't try to change the world. Try to live in it.
Devin, didn't you read something recently about Eva Braun's take on the Shield of Achilles? Eva Braun from St. John's?
I don't remember if I got this from her or not. Maybe I did. But just that, in addition to what you're saying, that not only does he bear the world on his shoulders, but he also, it's also representing everything that he has to forfeit. He has to give up. Right. And that's, maybe even more obvious than what you're saying, which is, very, very intriguing.
That's what I love. That's what I love about Homer, though, is that you used the word, it's even more obvious, right? I love that because that's what Homer is. Everything's obvious in Homer. It's just you don't notice it.
Right.
he's not. I like to. He taught me to think this way. That look, the world, the very surface of the world, it's a great place to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much there, and if perchance for some reason you get thrown into the underworld and you have to go deep, okay, fine, think about it. But everything you really need to understand is just sitting right on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a crucial point, because after Aristotle especially, the Greek mind and certainly the Roman mind seems to have a disposition to go deep,
mm-hmm.
right? To find deep hidden mysteries in everything. And obviously that's part of Greek thought anyway. They love riddles, but the quest to go deep almost as a proof that you're thinking.
Yeah.
And the willingness to ignore the surface of reality. That's something Homer would really object to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm convinced of that. And so all of those senses, in all of those different ways, Homer's the teacher of the Greeks. And he's saying to them, look, this is what the world is like. Don't pretend it's not.
Yeah.
And there's two things you need to learn how to do in this world as it is. Well, let's leave it at that. There's these two things you need to learn how to do above everything else. One is you need to deliberate together in community.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, you will destroy each other in the world and you'll lose your best friend. Second thing you need to do is you need to learn how to, well, this is going to sound silly maybe, but you need to learn how to tell stories.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if you can tell stories well, and if you can practice rhetoric well, which is to say deliberate in community, then you will become wise. And I would argue, in complete sincerity, that the best book you could ever read on rhetoric outside the Bible itself is the Iliad. You don't need any handbooks on rhetoric. You don't need Aristotle. Read the Iliad and watch how people give speeches in the Iliad, and you will learn everything that Aristotle learned by reading Homer and then taking the credit for himself. And then secondly, you don't need any guides or handbooks for writing except specific things, right? What if you want to learn how to tell a story, read the Odyssey. Because poetics, which means storytelling, really, it means making worlds. Okay. When you learn how to make an imaginary world, an imaginative
mm-hmm.
world that is rooted in reality and in your relationship with it, when you learn how to do that and you learn how to make decisions together in community, you have a wise community. And crucially, if you, again, he's saying, look, this is the real world. It's not going to stop being like this. People aren't going to stop dying. People are not going to stop fighting for limited resources. So don't pretend this is the real world. But if you accept it, you can make something good out of it. And that's the birth of Greek civilization, I believe.
Wow. Can I ask, so I think you had said in a previous correspondence that, or maybe even you've already mentioned it here, but that like the best philosophy textbook or something to that effect is Homer. And as I recall, Socrates and Plato have some disdain for Homer. And you were talking about like learning wisdom on the surface. And that's more or less what Homer asks us to do or helps us to do. And it seems to me that Plato digs deep, and philosophy is the depths, asking questions about the question. Whereas Homer doesn't do that. He brings you along in story, which reminds me a little bit of even C.S. Lewis's, retreat into story over and above direct, philosophical discourse in terms of apologetics. But am I reading that right? And is that what you're talking about?
Well, you keep exploding my head, but I'm going to do my best to stay on. So let me respond with a question, since you mentioned Socrates. What is philosophy?
Well, etymologically, this is the place I would start, with just the love of wisdom. And there's something to be said, I think, I enjoy Plato. I do, but there's an attentiveness that I have to have with Plato's argument, which strangely you have something of the depths displayed there in the open as you're trying to follow him, I guess maybe down the wormhole. And then Homer lays it all out there for you, and it requires ongoing rumination, reflection.
I would suggest a couple things here. One is, I suggested earlier that Homer is the beginning of this self-conscious Greek civilization, and he's the first person for whom we have writing, in the sense that we have it for him. He's the first poet whose writing we have. Apparently they invented vowels for Homer. So in that sense, we got our alphabet from Homer. Like the Phoenicians, they had an alphabet, but there are no vowels.
Yeah.
And the reason was because it was just for trade. They didn't care how long the vowels were. But in poetry, the length of vowels becomes really important. Okay. So Homer's the first, he's the beginning of a civilization. Plato is the end. What you have to keep in mind is that Plato is writing after the Peloponnesian War. And what he's saying is, what happened? Why did this glorious civilization that we had collapse? And so as a result, he takes all the skills that Homer taught him, like dialectic. Okay. Now, this is one of my controversial points, I guess, but to me, it becomes obvious over time. The way you're supposed to read Homer, the way they did read Homer, is as a diptych. Okay, so if you're familiar with a diptych, that's when you go into a church from the Middle Ages or something, you'll see two icons. And the one icon will be completely perfect in itself. It'll be an icon of the Lord. Okay. The other one will be an icon of the Blessed Virgin Mary holding the Lord on his lap as a child. And you can look at each one completely individually, and they're just loaded with wisdom. But the reason they put them next to each other is so that once you've looked at each one individually, you'll then start making comparisons. All right. And when you start comparing the Iliad with the Odyssey, you enter into a dialectic. Yeah. What Homer doesn't say is you need to enter into a dialectic. What he does do is lead you into a dialectic. Right. In Plato, because Plato is writing at the end of civilization, he needs to be aware of things, and he needs to make people aware of things. And so in a certain sense, the dialectic, as it is often expressed in Plato's writings, and especially as it's interpreted after him, a dialectic is a self-conscious exploration. And then what happens is Aristotle analyzes what Plato did and analyzes arguments, and then he comes up with a sort of a detached, objective set of rules that you can then apply from the outside. Right. But the thing is, all those rules that he's now teaching us to apply from the outside, he can only do that because they were from the inside earlier. And what I'd argue is that Plato and Aristotle are lesser philosophers than Homer because they had to make things so conscious, so aware. And the knowledge that we don't know we have is better than the knowledge that we do know we have. Well, let me rephrase that. There are things that we just know. There are things that you can't not know. The law of identity, that things, cohere, things like that. That there's a logos. We know that. Okay. Yep. The proof that we know that is we live like it. And when we stop living like it, we destroy ourselves. And then at a certain point, usually because of problems and crises, we have to become aware of some of those things. But let's face it, we don't become aware of very much. Right. Our souls are endless mysteries to us. But think about it. Now, let me draw an analogy here to sports. If you're an athlete, you know that you can run. All right. Before you ever think about it, you know that you can run. And one day you're going to run out as a 6-year-old, maybe, or a 2-year-old. You're going to run faster than your neighbors, and you're going to enjoy this fact, but you're not going to think about it necessarily. If some crisis comes up, like the people start complaining about how fast you're running, then you have to discover that you're faster than everybody else, and you have to become conscious of it. Okay. Now you join a football team. You're a professional NFL football player. You're a wide receiver, let's say. Well, what do they always say about wide receivers when they are coming into their own? They say, I don't have to think anymore. Right. The knowledge that you have to think about is knowledge that slows you down.
Yeah.
Okay. The implication, when you have to think about something and you are aware of the fact that you know something, the implication is you don't know it as well as you need to, or as you don't know it as well as you could.
Yeah, kind of like right. Lewis is like looking along the beam as opposed to looking at the beam. Like you're intuiting something as you're inside.
Second level intuition. So there's intuition that we have that we're born with. And then that intuition gets challenged by experience. And then we're conscious of it. But then eventually we get beyond that consciousness in some areas. And now we enter into a second level intuition. I think it's probably what Polanyi is talking about with tacit knowledge or personal knowledge. It's the idea that now I just know. And then, of course, what happens is the sophist comes along and says, well, how do you know?
Yeah.
And the common person says, I have no idea. I just know. And the sophist says, well, if you can't prove it, you don't know it, which is absolutely rubbish. But Socrates responds to that, right? And Socrates tries to reason the sophist out of that nonsense. And I see, Colton, you've got a comment, but let me just say something really quick here. That when Socrates speaks against Homer, okay, he's not really. Okay, he's raising questions about, but if you read the 10th book, my colleague Matt Bianco showed me this, and I think he should be famous for this. If you read the 10th book in the Republic, and I forgive me because I can't document this right now, but if you read the 10th book in the Republic, he gives you 4 things. In the 10th book of the Republic, Plato gives you 4 things that would make it valid for a poet to be welcomed back into the city. Okay. Yeah. All 4 of those things that he says are things that Homer does. In other words, he's told us through argumentation that Homer should be evicted from the city, and he's given us good reasons why. And by doing so, he's made us conscious of mistakes that we can make as thinking people. It's theological mistakes about the God, how we can misrepresent the God. And now he's made us the kind of people who will be careful about what we think about the gods. Plato has. Yeah. Okay. Now, having done that, 8 books later, he then says, without telling us, he learned this from Homer, without telling us, he says, and Homer's the guy you should read because he fulfills all the requirements of a great poet. So when we read Socrates, we have to understand that the Socratic irony is something he learned from Odysseus, and it goes very, very, very deep. He's constantly he's constantly telling a story with his right hand that he's undercutting with his left hand. And I don't mean that in a negative, cynical way. He's trying to force the sophist to see the truth. He's trying to take that man in the cave and get him out.
Yeah, to stun him.
We recently met with Dr. Michael Ward to discuss his book, Planet Narnia. And the whole premise behind that book is that Lewis is doing in the Chronicles of Narnia exactly what you're describing, instructing his readers without telling them so that they might grasp an intuition without knowing it in a really cryptic fashion. So it'd be really interesting to compare Homer with Lewis in this regard. What aspects of Homer is he cryptically instructing his readers, and in what way is Lewis doing it, and if there are any similarities there? But you said, what is philosophy? And Devin responded with the classic etymology, which is lover of wisdom. And I thought, the lover of wisdom doesn't love the propositional speech. He doesn't love the etymology of wisdom. He loves the actual thing of wisdom itself. He loves the experience of being wise and seeing others be wise. Now, this doesn't nullify any valid speech about wisdom.
Thank you.
Wisdom is philosophically a concept, but the philosopher, if he's a true philosopher, ought to love the actual thing itself rather than speech about the thing. That's my thought.
And I think one of the crucial points that Homer and C.S. Lewis agree on that makes them able to do what we're describing without it being wicked and manipulative is what they believe about the soul and what they believe about the world. Okay, so Homer and certainly C.S. Lewis believe that the world that we live in contains and teaches us truth. And so there are forms in it, like trees, let's say. A tree is a meaningful thing. It's not a random thing that accidentally developed over time. It's a meaningful thing, and it signifies. And what we should do is we should imitate the tree. We shouldn't imitate the tree because we'll gain power by doing so, although we will. But we should imitate the tree because the structure of the tree is wise, right? And what I mean simply by that is, one thing I mean by that is that you can imitate the tree by categorizing knowledge. And you can have a tree of information, right? We talk about the branches of learning. It would be good, I think, to go back and ask what the trunk is, right? But there are branches of learning. Yeah. Well, that's a tree metaphor, right? And so Lewis believed, and Homer believed, that the world is always teaching us. I'll even put it this way. The world is always revealing itself to us. And what it's revealing of itself to us is the truth about itself and about its maker. Okay? And so it's always speaking to us, whether it be almost literally in the noises of birds, but always symbolically in stones and trees. The stones, what is it? How does Shakespeare put it? A sermon in trees or something like stones and trees, a sermon in stones and trees. I forget the language. Forgive me. Yeah. But Shakespeare is the very last English writer who fully believed in this principle, that we believe in a world that teaches us and that we are capable of hearing what it has to say. Okay. The next poet who really, really wanted to believe that, but found he couldn't, was John Donne. Or maybe he could, but he lived in a world around him that didn't anymore. And so what you're watching happen in Hamlet is the end of the Homeric Christian order, right? Where no longer do we think we live in a knowable world. Okay, this quintessence of dust, right? Man has become a quintessence of dust, whereas in the past, man had been something that lived in the world and was a microcosm of the world. Yeah. And because he was a microcosm of the world, he could understand and love and delight in it. Now, the practical point is this, that with the Enlightenment, the world is no longer cosmos, it's chaos. And so in chaos, if there's order, it's order that you impose on the world. It's not order that you find in the world. That's abolition of man, right? If there's order in the world, then we can hear and absorb that order into ourselves, whether that be through music or language or speech or deliberation or whatever. We can absorb that order into ourselves and become like that world. Okay. But in the Enlightenment, the world is just chaos. It's not even a broken, sinful world. It's just chaos. Okay. And so since we can't survive chaos, we need to impose an order on it. And that's why we use language. And that's why we make art, right? We tell stories to take the chaos of the world and bring order to it. Yeah. How many creative writing programs say that, right? That's not what we're supposed to be doing as Christians when we write a story. We're supposed to do like Tolkien did and find the order in the creation and then imitate it by making another creation in the image of the creation that was spoken by the creator. Yeah. George MacDonald is fantastic on that. And I believe that's what Homer's doing. Okay. So the practical thing going on here is that you and I live in the world that John Donne was mourning. And by the way, the poem I would recommend by Donne about this, by John Donne is the anniversary. He's writing about the death of a little girl and then uses that to launch into, we've lost the world. We've lost the old order. We no longer can live in a knowable world. And he feels it in his bones in a way we feel it too, but we're not conscious of it in our age because we just intuitively think we live in chaos. But, and here's the crucial point, if we live in a world that is internally harmonious and our moral and aesthetic and practical duty is to live in the lessons that it's teaching us and in the forms in harmony with it, okay, then as an artist, it is utterly legitimate, right, and proper for me to simply take that order and put it in front of another person so that they can delight in it, be drawn to it, and become like it. But if I live in chaos and I've imposed an order on the world, then if I take that order that I've imposed on the world and teach it to another person, that is necessarily manipulative. That can only be tyrannical. Petty tyranny, but tyrannical in principle. And that's what Foucault, for example, and the postmodernists finally admitted. In the Enlightenment, they were doing that, but wouldn't admit it. And so you and I now, we're living in, I would suggest we're either living in an age like Homer or we're living in an age like Aristotle. We're either living at the beginning of a new civilization or the end of an old one, which of course means we're living in a transition, which is the end of an old one and the beginning of a new one. So we come back to Athena there. And we need Minerva's owl, right? We need the owl of Athena. It was Hegel who said the owl of Minerva only flies at dusk, right? What we need to do is, if we're living at the end of an age. If we are living at the end of an age, then we need to recognize that the owl of Minerva is flying around. We need to capture it, or at least listen closely, right? Because the owl of Minerva is wisdom, okay? And the owl of Minerva is saying things. And you are, I'm 60, so I'm assuming you guys are a lot younger than I am, but you are in a position to hear the song of Minerva's owl, and in a position where you need to hear the song of Minerva's owl, where you're going to be able, if you hear it, you're going to be able to say really obvious things that my generation, when I was a kid, and certainly my parents, never thought about. And because we never thought about it, and when it got pulled out from under us, we didn't. I'm talking about things like what is a man, what is a woman, right? We weren't ready for that. Culturally, we weren't ready. And then the sophists came along and said, well, how do you prove it? And we couldn't prove it because, I mean, you can't prove the unprovable. You can't prove the things that you're just looking at right in front of you. But your generation now has an opportunity to listen to the owl of Minerva, and you also have an obligation. Okay, there are things that you're going to hear as Minerva's owl flies, and then it's going to be nighttime. Okay, but after the nighttime, morning is coming. And when the people wake up in the morning, if we haven't preserved something of that wisdom that Minerva's owl was singing, they're not going to have it. Yeah. Because the owl Minerva doesn't fly in the morning, right? And so there's a wisdom that we have to capture, that you guys have to capture, and then you just have to bottle it up, just preserve it, and then pass it on to your grandchildren and children. And that could be what Homer did. You know, maybe he didn't consciously think this is the beginning. Maybe he thought he was at the end. I think he thought he was at the beginning. But maybe he thought he was at the end, but he could hear Minerva's owl singing, and he listened carefully. Right. And so he turned it into the best work of art he could. Now, one of the points I would say here that Minerva's owl is singing nowadays is how important form is. This is the underlying premise of everything I'm saying.
All right.
We don't live in an analytical cosmos. We live in an analogical cosmos. Okay. That means because we are images, we are analogies. Okay. That means that knowledge is not first analytical, not even best analytical. Knowledge is first analogical. And when we have a problem, we engage in analysis. And then the goal is to stop, right? The goal is to be done with the analysis and then go to a more informed, wiser analogy. And that means that the story is more important than the argument. That means that the composition, the music, the form of the music is more important than the structure of the debate. I'm sorry, than the content of the debate. And that's, I argue, what's happened to us is we've lost the ability to deliberate because we don't know how to listen to music. We've lost the ability to deliberate because we're told that truth is always analytical. It's always digital. It's always got to be scientifically proven. But the kinds of truth that are on that order are very low level truths. Those aren't wisdom truths. Are you familiar with T.S. Eliot's Choruses from the Rock? Where is the wisdom that we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge that we've lost in information?
I've not read it.
Wonderful. It's understand that it's choruses, and choruses speak directly, right? So it's not analogical. It is analogical, but it's more direct statement. It's more proclamation, which is what choruses do. So at first, when you read it, it can be off-putting. But if you accept that and then just kind of meditate on it and find someone to talk about with it, it's astonishing. But he asks these basic questions. Where is the wisdom that we have lost in knowledge? Where is it? Where is the knowledge that we have lost in information? The whole age is asking this question, except they won't ask it. Their soul is asking it. But we actually believe that we should trust the science, right? We actually believe that the highest wisdom is the things that can be proven to us. And what we're finding is almost nothing can be proven to us. And yet we know so much that we simply won't admit. And that's because we are images living in an analogical cosmos. And that's why Homer is a better philosopher than Plato and Aristotle, because Plato has to analyze. He has to engage dialectically because of his age. And then Aristotle has to refine that analysis into his whole philosophy is an analytical philosophy. But when you get to the 20th century, analysis has collapsed. What we need now is good stories and good music.
And if we think about this theologically, we can look at Homer through the lens of Christ in the New Testament, even the Bible as a whole. The Bible is a storybook, and by means of a story, it compels our lives. It's not totally propositional commands and imperatives. Now, it is that, but the overarching emphasis is a story. That through a story, through a narrative, you find yourself in it, and it therefore commands you as a result, being a story, primarily. There's something about that in Homer as well, theologically even. I think we can make the case that it's in large part due to Homer's being made in the image of God, that these divine intuitions of creation and story can even come about.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. And I would add to it that he was chosen by God to prepare the world for the coming of Christ. And his books lay out a path for that. But I also want to add this from your point about the Bible, because I grew up in a very Bible-centered home. And I remember I am an analytical person, believe it or not. I love analysis. I was reading Calvin's Institutes for Fun in freshman year of college. I just like reading books like that. I had Louis Sperry Chafer's 7 volumes of systematic theology. I tried to read the whole set. It was too boring though. But so I love analysis, and I love cutting things up into their parts and so on. But you're right. The Bible does not have a systematic theology in it anywhere, right? And that bothered me when I was young. Why? But lately I've just accepted that God knew what he was doing. And one of the things that really turned the corner for me was when I realized that the law, you mentioned the law, right? The law is given in Exodus chapter 20, which means that before the law is given, 19 chapters of Exodus tell us a story. And that story is about a God, a husband, delivering a woman out of slavery and making and bringing her into his home to be his wife. And that's preceded by 50 chapters of stories in Genesis. So you have 69 chapters of stories and then 1 chapter of a law. And then get this. We often think then the rest of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy is all law. It's not. It's a building. It's a house. in which that husband and wife are going to live. Okay. And the terms of the relationship of being a member of that household and being in that family are, if you're a member of my family, I'm your husband, you're not going to have any other one. Okay. Secondly, my kids aren't going to be envious of each other. If I give something to one, the other one's not going to envy and think I love him less because of it. Third, you're not going to steal from each other. I'll take care of you. You can trust me. Don't steal from each other. Fourth, I'm going to give you an image of our relationship by letting you have a parallel, an analogical relationship with each other. But you're going to be faithful to each other. You're not going to envy the neighbor who got a similar relationship, but isn't exactly like the one you got. And I'm not going to let you complain because it's not perfect. You're going to accept the relationship that I've given, because the real thing that's happened here isn't that you have fallen in love. The real thing that's happened here is that you're imitating me, and you're learning what I'm like by treating your wife the way I treat my people. Okay. And so you're not going to commit adultery. You're not going to bear false. Right? These are the terms of our marriage. So even when we do talk about the marriage, the covenant, the law, we like to say there's 620 laws, but most of those have to do with the design of the temple and the way you're going to make sacrifices, which is, in other words, when you do violate this agreement, I'm still going to be here waiting for you. And this is what you have to do to come home. Okay. And when you think of it that way, the biggest mistake we make, I think, as Christians in raising children, is that we give them the law without the house, without the marriage, right? We tell them, these are the rules you have to live by. Why? Because these are the rules you have to live by. But that's not the biblical account at all. The reason you're living by these rules is because I am your husband and I'm going to take care of you. And this is the way my household is going to be governed. If you want to be in this household, these are the terms. And by the way, this is going to give you life. And you're going to love this. And I'm going to make you fruitful, and you're going to inherit the land, and I'm going to take care of you. And they didn't, so he sent his son, right? I mean, it's a very different way. If we approach the law analytically, which is to say, as though it's sitting there by itself and we just have to obey it, and we become stoic Christians, God have mercy on our souls, because it's never God's intention that we obey the law that way. That's Pharisees. God's intention is that we obey the law so that we can enter into the Holy of Holies. And dare I say it, consummate our marriage. Right? He wants an eternal marriage, which also, by the way, is what Odysseus wants.
I was just telling Devin today, we've been talking about what to read next and to discuss next. And we had the whole summer all the way through October mapped out with a really particular and strict schedule. But then we just asked ourselves, I mean, we're low budget and really no budget podcast. We just asked ourselves, is that really what we want to do? Why don't we just choose writings that we would enjoy? And I think we decided to nix the Odyssey for Plato's Meno after we read through Lewis's Chronicles. But then I texted him this morning and was like, "Oh, Devin, I think I want to read Odysseus. I miss Odysseus." Oh.
You won't get hurt if you read the Meno, but if you read the Odyssey, it'll help you read the Meno. And I'll just say this about the Odyssey. One of my favorite discoveries is, you remember the island, whose island he leaves at the beginning?
Yeah, Calypso's island.
Calypso, right? And you know what Calypso means?
Hidden? Is it?
And yeah, and do you know what you call it if you stop hiding something on Calypso? In Greek, there's a Greek word. You add a Greek preface to it.
Apocalypsis.
That's exactly right. The Odyssey literally is the apocalypse of Odysseus, who leaves Calypso's island, leaves the place where he's hidden, and he journeys home. And what does he find when he's home? He finds enemies trying to take his wife away from him. So what does he do? He destroys those enemies, and he takes his home, and he establishes his temple. He establishes, because in that world, the temple and the cat palace are the same thing. The book of the Apocalypse of John is in the apocalyptic tradition. And the apocalyptic tradition comes from allegorizations of the Odyssey. So that's one of the many ways that the Odyssey itself and the works of Homer are used by God to prepare for the New Testament. It's just absolutely fantastic. Draw parallels between Revelation and the Odyssey, and you'll be fascinated.
That is.
Yes, Odysseus. He comes back home. He's hidden. And then he re-enters his own chamber,
In disguise.
reveals himself. Apocalypto. Yeah, wow. Fascinating. That's great.
Don't subject the book of Revelation to the Odyssey, but because the Odyssey is inspired by the Holy Spirit in more of a way than the Odyssey is. But let the Odyssey show you things in Revelation that the Greeks would easily see. Here's another example: the book of Hebrews. Okay, this is one of my favorite things I've ever seen. The first line of the Odyssey says, "Sing, goddess of the man of polutropon." Polutropo. Okay. That word polutropo is absolutely untranslatable. It has too many meanings. If I were to translate it, I would say many meanings. But, so it's a self-expressing word, right? Poly means many, but tropos is the idea of, it could be a transformation, it could be a change, it could be he's clever, many thoughts, right? And if you read the Odyssey, you get 10 different translations. Every one of them will translate it differently. And that's because the word isn't translatable. It'll be whatever. That's the key word to the Odyssey. However the translator translates that word in line 1 is going to tell you how that translator is approaching the Odyssey.
Yeah.
Okay. What's really fascinating to me is the book of Hebrews. Okay. The book of Hebrews begins in English like this: having spoken to the fathers in the prophets in many portions and in many ways. Okay. In many ways is polutropo. It's the same word. Okay. Now, if you are a Jew in the first century and you can read, one of the first books you read was the Odyssey, and if you're educated, you memorized the beginning of the Odyssey and maybe a heck of a lot more of it. When you read God having spoken to the fathers in the prophets in many portions and in many ways, okay, when you read that in that letter, you're probably not going to be able to help thinking of the Odyssey. The echo is there. And at least enough people are going to read that some of them are going to think about it, right? If we were Greeks sitting around in Ephesus in the first century, which is where Hebrews was written probably, but so let's say we were sitting in Jerusalem and the letter comes to us and we're reading it and we read that first line, okay? And we start chatting about it. One of us is going to say, that's the same word as the opening of the Odyssey. Why do you think you did that? And I have an opinion about that, which I can't sit in one of those circles, but my opinion is this, that the book of Hebrews is written for Jewish Christians in the first century. But if you're a Jewish Christian in the first century, you are Hellenized. It's in Greek. Okay. And so you are responding to it as a Jewish person looking for a sign. Right. And so you hear what Mary, I think, is saying. The whole group of apostles that write the book. I have another theory about Hebrews too, but your audience will think I'm insane if I explain it to you now. But when the book of Hebrews was written by that group of people who wrote it, among whom was Paul, they were writing it so that if you have a Jewish disposition and you read it in light of the Old Testament, it will interpret the Old Testament for you and it will fulfill all of it. But if you have a Greek disposition and you're looking for, unlike the Jewish man is looking for signs, Paul tells us, but the Greeks are looking for wisdom. Well, the Greeks, what they mean by wisdom often means what Proverbs 1 says, which is to say riddles, the riddles of the wise, right? So Greeks love riddles. And so the author of Hebrews never explicitly says to the readers, if you know the Odyssey, it's going to help you. you're going to be able to read I won't even say it's going to help you. You're going to be able to read this book in light of the Odyssey. Okay. And what I think he's saying in Hebrews 1 is, yeah, the Lord is better than angels. Indubitably, clearly. Our Lord is better than angels. He's better than Moses in Hebrews 2. He's giving a better covenant and so on and so forth. All of that is the main point. But if you want it, this isn't a main point and your theology doesn't depend on it. But if you want it, he's also saying to the Greek-ish disposition, oh, you know that character Odysseus that Homer wrote about? Christ is better than him too. Right? And not only is he better, why is he better than Moses? Why is he better than the law? Why is he better than the tabernacle and the old covenant? Because he fulfills them all. Right? He doesn't destroy them, he fulfills them. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. I believe that's true of mythology too. He's saying he doesn't destroy mythology. He conquers the Greek gods and then fulfills the mythology. And so when we read the Iliad and the Odyssey, we're reading about conquered gods, right? We don't have to worry about Zeus. He's conquered. But we can see that all the groping of the Greek people and the Roman people that Paul talks about, all of that is fulfilled in Christ, right? And you see that when you can see that if you want to, when you read the book of Hebrews. Again, I'm not making a theological claim about what Hebrews means and, getting into all the arguments among theologians, but I'm saying that it's a fulfillment, right? That if you are inclined to look at it in a Greekish kind of way, there's, I don't know, Easter eggs are in there for you. I don't know. They're not theologically decisive. They're not going to settle theological issues if that's what you're looking for. But if you're just looking for the delightful pleasure of God's presence in the whole creation, it's there. It's all over the place. And in the works that we do.
Well, Mr. Kern, Andrew, I think it's a fantastic way. This is a fantastic way to land the plane despite any lack of conversational organization. I think that the importance of Homer for education and philosophy and its relation to Bible interpretation and any overtones that we see in the scriptures or even any scriptural overtones we see in Homer have been made really clear. I've really enjoyed myself this last hour, and I know Devin and I speak for Devin as well. We're very thankful that you've joined with us today. It's a shame. I was just thinking it's a shame that we can't meet in person, and go buy dinner.
Where do you live?
I'm in Texarkana, Texas, and Devin is in Tulsa.
Oh, well, come to our conference or something. We have a conference in Charleston in the summer, and we have conferences in Texas every now and again. So keep your ears out. Keep an eye out for it. We'll be in Texas. I think we're going to be there in October. I'm not positive, but I know Texas is big. But come to our conference and stay in touch regardless.
Yeah, you and I are friends on Facebook, and I think I keep up with you a little bit on LinkedIn. And I really enjoy your pithy little Facebook posts. You posted something here recently about education and boredom that I found really really encouraging and true.
Oh, nothing is boring. Nothing is boring. The trouble is that we have to spend so many years sitting at the desk learning nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is ironic, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I agree with you. One thing I've been kind of thinking about with your... I'm sorry, Colton, you were trying to land the plane. I'm going to say something that where my mind has been. Yes, where can we crash this plane at?
See if we can crash it.
But I was thinking about all that you were saying about, let's see, like world building or wisdom as kind of creating worlds, creating stories, and about how Homer was kind of at perhaps the dawn of a new age, and they're very analytical toward the sunset of the age. And you were positing that you weren't sure whether we were at the dawn or the sunset here, whether it was dawn or dusk. But there are some decent stories out there. Some, especially, I mean, you noted Tolkien and Lewis, and more. Well, I don't know if I'd say more and more, but there are some believers out there today who are writing some decent stories and even trying to produce film and the like. But as I look around in general at the stories that we consume, I would think those are primarily going to be streaming series and films and things like that for most Americans and people. But that is discouraging as I think about the stories. More the I can't remember it now, but you're saying, like, do we love what is good or do we love kind of what's evil? And there are some good ones out there, but they seem flooded. Like little lights in a dark place. I don't know if that resonates with you, or if that's something that you definitely want to challenge. But I am thinking, man, I admire a man like Tolkien or Lewis, who in the midst of modernity were, and postmodernity really, were seeking to counter everything, and infuse. Yeah.
You know what, though? Sorry to interrupt, but I would even challenge that I don't think they were trying to counter. Have you read The Silmarillion?
I haven't. Colton loves it. It's his favorite book.
Okay, read the Einolundale. Okay, just the Einolundale. It's about 10 pages. Okay, and what Tolkien believed, what Tolkien believed is not that we have to stand up against the direction of the world, but that the song that God is singing, which is the creation, is not threatened by the discords that the evil one sings. All darkness can do is, darkness can turn out the light, right? All darkness can do, all evil can do is create a discord. But no discord is beyond God's capacity to record, right? To harmonize. And what we should be doing, I believe, is what Tolkien and Lewis were doing, MacDonald, all the great artists until, again, like I said before, Shakespeare, and then Donne after that. Because I argue that English literature has fallen off a cliff over the last 400 years. There's almost nothing comparable to Shakespeare after Shakespeare. And certainly there's nothing comparable to Chaucer. And the reason is because Spencer's, but the reason for that is because that marks the end of the microcosmic conception of art, right? It's Spencer writes an essay that really is the defense of poesy, but it ends a poetry. And so where I'm going with this is what you're describing is correct, that Christians in the 21st century, when they do art, they don't think to themselves, I should be imitating microcosmically the cosmos. They think we're in chaos. They don't think it. They again, this is the intuition. Their intuition is we are in chaos, and I need to stand up against the chaos and push back against the chaos by saying the truth. And I'm gonna maybe I'll take the truth and put it in a pleasant way. I'll add sugar. I'll add an ornament. But what they're not doing is simply letting the truth arise from the soil like a tree. And leaf by niggle, right? They're not just allowing reality to tell its own story through them. And that's going to be, when that happens, like Tolkien and Lewis, Tolkien really much better than Lewis. But when you let the truth tell its story through you, and you are gifted by God to do that, and you have that prophetic anointing, then what you can do is unfathomably significant. In fact, just to illustrate that, the British newspaper, The Guardian, in the 1990s, they surveyed their readers, and they asked them, what is the most important literature of the 20th century? And they really wanted it to be something like James Joyce, James Joyce, Ulysses, the Odyssey, right? They really wanted it to be James Joyce. Overwhelmingly, the readers, not best to it, but the most important literature of the 20th century in English was The Lord of the Rings. So then another group of people who were a little more booky, like more highbrow, the Folio Society, who make beautiful books. They're the book people, right? The Folio Society, they thought, okay, we'll get a better vote. We'll go out and find out what, they'll have a more informed. Overwhelmingly, like 60 or 70% of their readers said the most important books of the 20th century were by Tolkien. And you probably know perfectly well that when it came out, what's that term that the critics did something to it? What does it critics do to books? Anyway, they rejected it. They didn't like it. But what book has altered our culture more than The Lord of the Rings? Why do we watch Star Wars? Why was there a Star Wars? It's because of The Lord of the Rings. Okay. And why is Star Wars structured like it is? Because it's imitating The Lord of the Rings. Not only, of course not, but it's imitating that, it's in that tradition. And so when a Christian author receptively absorbs the reality and truth of the creation into his soul in its archetypal forms, right? In those forms, which are making a comeback now. When they do that, we will get unfathomably powerful literature. And that's what will turn our civilization around. Now, for you and me as teachers, I doubt maybe one of you two could do it. I couldn't. But assuming that neither of us can do that, right? Create, the Bach masterpiece or the Tolkien masterpiece. What can we do? We can as teachers not teach hyper-analytically by taking a cut-up text with analytical questions that are boring and uninteresting. And we can take a living text into a classroom and we can receive that text into our souls. We can feed on the text. Instead of overlording it, we can be receptive to that text, and we can model that receptivity to our students. And then some of them will do that. And you know what? You know perfectly well you've been changed by the books you've read when you've received them, right? Forgive me for the analogy, but when we receive them, we're given the power to become the son of that book, right? And then we become like that book, and we can speak that book's message, and we can internalize it. And nobody even knows that we're speaking that book's message because it's coming out of our mouth through our body. And we become genuinely creative. And if we can teach 2 kids, if each Christian school teacher could teach 2 kids to receive the truth like that, okay, then from those 2 kids in each class in each school, at the end of 10 years, there would be thousands of kids who are better able to receive reality. And among those will be a very few who have the astonishing giftedness like a Tolkien. Okay. And from those, there will be some who combine gift with training, with experience, with soil, and they'll be able to produce. We'll see another Bach. We'll see another Tolkien. We'll see another Chaucer. And then when we start making the best movies and telling the best stories, okay, it will not be an aggressive attack. It will be an act of service, and it will be a proclamation of the truth that souls will respond to because souls do. And we've got to stop thinking that God is spelled QED, right? God is not. God is a holy Trinity manifested in a person. Yeah. And until we get back to that formalized conception of reality and feed souls on that, we won't. Okay, I got to say one last thing. It's a promotion. Sure. Okay, I'm doing a lot of work right now on contemplating the temple. All of that I've been saying without mentioning it has been based on my contemplations of the temple. And I believe that the temple is the form of reality, that it reveals everything, that everything reveals itself to us in the pattern that the temple establishes. Okay, and so I'm writing a book about that. That's one reason I'm thinking about it so hard. And in the fall, I'm offering an atrium online, which is a 2 weeks a month class for teachers. And it's going to be about how to teach. It's going to be about how to teach the way we're talking about teaching now. if you've got people in your eye, or you too, if you're interested, if you'd like to just contemplate how to teach receptively so that we're transformed by what we teach, I'd love it if anybody who listens to your podcast, or either of you, were interested in taking it. It's an atrium, cerseiinstitute.org/atrium, and the details will be coming out. By the time this is posted, the details will be posted.
Wow.
Forgive me for turning it into an advertisement, but it seemed to fit.
No way. That's perfectly fine. That's part of what we're trying to do here. In addition to just having great conversations about great books,
good.
We any guests that we have, we'd love to promote any research or resources that our guests are affiliated with.
Well, if you got Michael Ward and who was the other one you said you interviewed?
Luis Marcos.
Yeah, those are real people, man. If you're getting those people, you're gonna get people listening to you. And if you made it easy for me. You asked good questions, and I just ran off with them. And you, forgive me, but you made it really easy. So.
All right, gentlemen. Thanks to both of you, and especially to you, Andrew, Mr. Kern.
No, thanks to both of you, especially to you.
Wait, by the way, do you know who Ben House is? He said he met you wait, you know Ben House? Former headmaster in southwestern Arkansas? You do?
He's been a guest on the podcast.
Maybe about 20 years ago? 20 years ago?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, I don't think I've seen him.
Headmaster in southwest Arkansas?
Sounds right.
Interesting. Yeah, he's my best friend. I go to church with him, and...
No kidding.
We actually just finished a manuscript of a book we just began. It's like a short little appeal for classical Christian education catered to parents. We go to church together, and he's my best friend and really like a spiritual father and mentor to me.
Tell him I said hi.
Yeah, will do.
Wait, you're Ben House's mentee?
Oh, that hurt. That hurt. No, he's not.
You're his prodigy.
He's not his mentee. He's Virgili.
Yeah,
he's his homie.
Now we're talking.
Yeah, we shouldn't be. All right, well, say hi to Ben. Nice to hear his name again.
Yeah, will do.
God bless you.
Will do. Yep.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.